Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Miss Hoa. My name is Nguyễn Tường, and today I'm glad to present Chapter 1, Sensory Marketing Principle. And the chapter introduces the fundamental idea behind sensory marketing and explain why it has become increasingly important in the marketing environment. And here is the table of content for Chapter 1, covering the global marketing context, the key theory, the practical application, and the advantage and disadvantage of the sensory marketing. And in today's global and highly individualized marketplace, companies can no longer compete solely on functional attributes. Consumers are increasingly treated not as a homogeneous mass, but as an individual with unique desire, value, and lifestyle. Now, let's take IKEA as an example for applying sensory marketing through multiple senses to shape the customer experience. First, the visual environment. IKEA used fully furnished showroom and warm color to create the real-life spaces, and this visual setup creates a sense of familiarity, encouraging customers to simulate how the product could fit into their own homes. And because vision dominates human perception, this helps consumers process information more holistically rather than analytically. And second, tactile interaction. Customers are encouraged to touch material, sit on sofa, and physically interact with product, and different texture enhance the comfort. As a result, touch increases the perceived quality and reduces the purchase risks before the actual buying decision. And the third, the auditory sense. IKEA maintains a low-level ambient sound environment with minimal noise and no loud music. This creates a calm atmosphere and reduces the cognitive overload and also support the focused exploration. So, overall, the sensory can work together to form an emotionally engaging shopping journey of IKEA. Okay, so next moving to the section 1.1, the human senses. Humans experience the environment and the outside world through 5 senses: vision, hearing, smell, touch, and taste. So for companies and marketers, this implies that brains are not only evaluated cognitively, but also perceived and inputted through multisensory experience. Here we have an example about Nike. Nike designed multisensory brand experience across digital platform and retail environment, and also the product usage. So through vision, Nike communicates performance and energy using dynamic visual and athletic imagery. Through touch, consumers physically experience the product by trying on shoes and feeling material comfort. So these sensory input become embodied during the product consumption, such as wearing Nike running shoe during the physical activity. And we have section 1.2 here, discuss how the global marketing environment can create new demands for sensory marketing in both theory and practice. 2 major driving forces here are the cultural value shift and the development of digital technology. First, we will explore the cultural value shift. It reflects a movement from survival-oriented and traditional value towards self-expression, identity, and personal fulfillment. Consumers no longer seek products only for the functional utility, but for their symbolic and emotional meaning in constructing their personal identity. Here we have the example about Highland Coffee. Highland Coffee blends cultural familiarity with modern individuality by preserving the iconic taste of cà phê sữa đá while allowing customers to customize the sweetness. Also, the wooden decor and lantern-inspired design reflect the local heritage, while artwork attract the urban youth here. Second, the digital technology has transformed communication and shift power from company to consumer. Through social media and online platforms, individuals actively share experience, opinion, and sensory impression, turning digital spaces into the interactive and multisensory brand environment. For example, online review, unboxing video, and social media posts shape the brand perception through visual style and the emotional engagement. Together, these 2 forces reinforce the need for sensory marketing strategy that engage individuals emotionally and experientially in both physical and digital contact. And how is individualization in modern society closely linked to the self-fulfillment in consumption? The definition of self-fulfillment refers to an individual pursuit of a higher quality of life and meaningful consumption. As a result, modern consumers increasingly engage in high-value activity such as health and wellness services, sustainable food choice, and cultural experience. And these activities reflect the personal value, lifestyle references, and long-term life goal rather than short-term utility. For example, a young consumer may choose organic food, subscribe to a fitness apps, and spend time in athletic coffee space as part of their self-development journey. In this case, consumption is connected to their personal growth and life satisfaction, not merely the fulfillment of basic needs. And next, we have identity creation. And identity creation refers to how brands have individual shape their self-image and social status. Today, consumers do not buy products only for the functional benefit, but also for what those products symbolize. For example, here we have a context of purchasing a Tesla can signal that the consumer is aware of the environment and technological sophistication. In this case, the product becomes an extension of the personal identity. The third one is multisensory experience. Multisensory experience refers to the holistic engagement of all five human senses in how consumers perceive and evaluate a brand. Instead of relying on only one sense, the brand can design experience that stimulate the sight, the sound, smell, touch, and taste together. A clear example here is the Ultraviolet at Shanghai, a 3D immersive restaurant. Here, the visual projection transforms the dining space into a different environment. Customized music shapes the emotion, and ambient scents enhance the flavor perception. Texture of tableware and food stimulate touch, and taste remain the core experience. All these sensory elements work together to intensify emotion and create a highly memorable dining experience. Let's move into the section 1.4, Theoretical Foundation. One of the most important theoretical foundations of sensory marketing is the Krishna sensory marketing model. According to Krishna, sensory stimuli do not simply decorate the consumption environment. Instead, they actively shape how consumers perceive, evaluate, and respond to the brand. And the model explains a clear process about that sensory cue first influence the perception, and then perception shapes the judgment, and judgment ultimately drives the consumer behavior. Importantly, much of this process happens subconsciously. For example, here we have the Mochi Coffee and Milk. When customers enter Mochi Coffee and Milk, they can experience the natural wooden texture, the soft lighting, and the wide atmosphere. They can associate the environment with simplicity, calmness, and trust. So the sensory cue can shape the perception of food quality and authenticity, increasing the customer willingness to stay longer and buy a premium. Let's explore two more key theory models. First, we have the embodied cognition. Embodied cognition suggests that our thinking deeply connected to our physical experience. Instead of separating the mind from the body, this theory argues that consumers understand and evaluate the world through bodily sensations, such as the weight, the movement, and touch. Next, we have the atmospheric, proposed by Kotler. It focuses on how physical environment influence customer emotion and behavior. A clear example can be seen at Park Hyatt Saigon. Park Hyatt Saigon has the lobby is designed with spatial layout, warm ambient lighting, natural material, and with a soft background music. This atmospheric element immediately creates a feeling of calmness, exclusivity, and the trust among guests. As a result, guests feel more comfortable staying longer, using additional hotel services, and developing a positive overall evaluation of the brand. We have the SOR model, which is explaining consumer behavior as the three-stage psychological process. First, consumers are exposed to stimuli such as the music, the scent, the lighting, and the store layout. These stimuli do not directly cause the behavior. Instead, they influence the organism. meaning the consumer internal emotional state. So when customers feel comfortable, energized, or relaxed, they are more likely to display approach behavior. And this model highlights that emotion can act as a vertical bridge between the environment and the consumer behavior. Moving to the next part. Now, let's compare three major marketing approaches. First is the transaction marketing, which is TM. It's based on the microeconomic exchange theory. Its main focus is the product and the transaction itself. Companies use tools such as the 4B, product, price, place, and promotion to try the short-term sales. For example, a message such as buy iPhone today with a limited time price offer focus purely on the transaction. And second, we have the relationship marketing or RM. Shift the focus from transaction to long-term customer relationship. And it is grounded in interaction in social exchange theory. Brand use CRM system, customer support, and personalization to retain the customer. For instance, Apple built long-term relationship through Apple ID accounts, after-sales service, and its integrated ecosystem. And finally, we have the sensory marketing, or SM. It's based on the psychological theory, such as emotive cognition, stimulus response theory that I have mentioned before. And its primary focus is sensory experience and perception. Brand can use sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste to shape how consumers feel and remember the brand. And in Apple case here, we have as an example, minimalist store design in hands-on product testing, and also the quiet spaces environment can reinforce the premium and innovative brand identity. Moving to the section 1.5, what is the sensory marketing? Sensory marketing is an integrated marketing approach that explains how firms use the 5 human senses to create a multisensory brand experience. Now, let's break it out from the two perspectives, the firm and the individual. As for the individual perspective, in sensory marketing, individuals are treated as the active participant rather than the passive receiver. Consumer value is co-created through interaction with the brands, product, and services during everyday use. Therefore, companies do not directly create the value, but promote the value creation by designing the meaningful interaction that support consumer identity creation processes. Next, we have the firm perspective. With their service processes, consumers are as an active co-producer in the service processes, and interaction can shape the perceived service quality. Service interaction can involve the environment, personal, technology and system, information, and the time. And the sensory experience here is involved a deep sensory engagement created through cues and stimuli in the service processes. So it can be positive, neutral, or negative. And sensory experience can echo the perception through the 5 senses of human. Sensory marketing also refers to the marketing strategy, in which firms use sensory cues and stimuli to create a memorable consumer experience. To do this, firms design strategy across all 5 senses. Visual elements such as the design, the color, the packaging, and layout have expressed the brand identity and are often the first point of contact with consumer. Next, we have sound, including the music, the voice, the silent, or signature sound, play a key role in shaping moods and atmosphere. Brand can also add or remove the sound to influence how consumers feel in a space. And smell. Smell is strongly linked to the emotion and memory. Scents are often used to enhance and increase the recall and improve the brand recognition. Touch relates to material, texture, weight, and temperature. It contributes to the well-being and memory and encourage physical interaction with the product. Finally, taste. Taste goes beyond basic flavor. It reflects individual references and cultural differences, and often work together with other senses through cross-sensory synergy. Okay, so moving to the next part, 1.5.3, about the sensory marketing model. Here we have the figure illustrate the sensory marketing model developed by Houghton. And this model explains how company connects service processes with the 5 human senses through sensory strategy. First, sensory information is delivered through sensor, and these sensors trigger the sensation, which are the consumer's psychological and emotional reaction. Sensory cues and stimuli then translate the sensation into concrete expression of brand identity. Through the interaction of these elements, company can create multi-sensory brand experience that shape consumer value, experience, and brand image. Let's talk about the chapter number 2, the sensory brand. For this chapter, we will explore the sensory brand, its function, the role of the 5 senses, the gender differences, and the potential benefit of neuromarketing for company and individuals. Here is the table content for the chapter. We can analyze the 5 main perspectives for the sensory brand. Okay, so here we have the section 2.1 about the gastro perspective. So the gastro perspective explains that consumers do not perceive brand by adding up individual sensory cues. Instead, perception is holistic, where meaning is created through the relationship between elements such as design, space, sound, and material. And this holistic perception directly forms consumer experience and the brand image. For example, here we have Disneyland. Disneyland is a classic illustration of the gastro perspective in sensory marketing. Visitors do not consciously evaluate the music, the architecture, or the scene separately. Instead, these elements work together to create a seamless narrative environment. And the relationship between sensory cues form a unified perception of fantasy and immersion, which become the dominant brand image stored in memory. And in sensory marketing, experience is perceived as a meaningful whole, not as a separate sensation. Now, moving to the next part, the brand as the black box. Here we will discuss about consciousness versus unconsciousness. So in sensory marketing, perception does not rely solely on conscious awareness. While consumers may believe they make rational decisions, a large part of sensory processing occurs unconsciously. Sensory cue can influence the emotion, association, and behavior automatically, often before conscious evaluation takes place. Here we have a table to outline the difference between conscious and unconscious. Conscious refers to the logical evaluation. However, unconscious is the emotional reaction. And conscious can be easy to verbalize, but unconscious difficult to explain. Conscious can focus on the price, the fixture, but unconscious is the experience of the atmosphere and the mood. And for this part, I will dive into the joint brand theory. Joint brand theory explains that human decision making is not purely rational. The brand operates through 3 systems. The reptilian brand for instinctive reaction, the limbic brand for emotion and memory, and the neocortex for logical reasoning. And in consumption context, sensory cue often activate emotional and instinctive response before the conscious thought occurs. And for this part, we will explore about the cerebrum. The cerebrum, also known as the cerebral cortex, is the largest and most dominant part of the brain. It plays a key role in higher intellectual functions such as thinking, learning, memory, and perception. Unlike earlier brain systems, the cerebrum is primarily associated with the conscious awareness and cognitive processing. So here we have the application of cerebrum in the consumer experience. For example, in the supermarket, consumer can use the cerebrum to interpret the price label, the promotion, and the product information consciously. Visual cues such as the self-tag, the discount sign, and the nutritional label support the learning and reasoning, and also the belief formation. And moving to another system, the limbic system plays a central role in how consumers emotionally experience the brands. It evaluates sensory stimuli by comparing the new inputs with the previous experiences and assign the emotional meaning. Thus, the key structures such as the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus here, the limbic system connects sensation to emotion, memory, and motivated behavior. Here we have the table to outline the difference between these 3 key structures. First, the amygdala. which is referred to the emotional response and give sensory input is emotional tone. And the hippocampus, which is about learning and memory encoding. It can store emotionally charged the experience. And the hypothalamus is regulate the physiological state and link emotion to the approach or the avoidance behavior. Okay, so what about the reptilian brain? Reptilian brain is responsible for basic survival instinct and automatic reaction. It operates unconsciously and responds quickly to familiar, simple, and the reassuring cues. In consumer context, this brain system drives the habitual behavior and rather than the emotional attachment or rational evaluation. Unlike the cerebrum or the limbic system, the reptilian brain doesn't analyze or reflect, it only reacts. So the simplicity and the perceived safety are critical in activating this brain system, which explains why consumers often repeat the routine purchase without concerted deliberation. Now let's explain where our senses are actually processed in the brain. Sensory perception doesn't happen randomly. Each sense is connected to a specific brain area that interpret the incoming stimuli. For example, visual cues such as color or layout are processed in the occipital lobe, while sound and music are interpreted in the temporal lobe. The touch is linked to the parietal lobe, and the smell has a direct connection to the limbic system, which explains why senses are strongly tied to emotion and memory. Although each sense has its own location, the brain integrates them into one unified experience. This is why sensory marketing is effective. It aligns with how human brain naturally process and combine sensory information. In sensory marketing, the 5 human senses are as the main channels through which individuals receive information from the environment. This sensory input can come from the sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste, either separately or at the same time. One sensory input enters the body, and the brain doesn't respond automatically. Instead, it transforms this input into perception, which forms the basis of how individuals think, feel, and behave. Importantly, perception is not objective. 2 people can receive the same sensory input, but interpret it differently, depending on the prior experiences, emotions, and context. The brain is also highly selective. It filters the information and sometimes infers the meaning rather than processing every sensory signal in detail. As a result, many sensory influences operate below concerted awareness, quietly shaping the decision and behavior. This explains why sensory marketing is powerful. Because it can work not only on what consumers notice, but also on how the brain interprets sensory cue, often without a deliberate intention. Here we will explore about the perceptual process. The perceptual process explains how individuals transform sensory stimuli into the perception, and all humans receive the sensory cues and stimuli from the environment, right? And these cues are treated as the sensory input, which the brain organizes and interprets to generate the perception. Importantly, perception is not objective. This is a subjective process shaped by the individual attitude and also the emotion, needs, and desires. In this psychological process, cognition and perception are the most active area of the brain. They are not fully separate but closely interconnected. Cognition includes mental processes such as the knowledge, the memory, and the thinking, and also the decision making, which is strongly influenced how sensory input is interpreted. Therefore, individuals often perceive brands and products based on what they already know and believe about them. And moving to the really interesting part, here we have the memory of the brain. One of the most influential models of human memory explains memory as a system composed of 3 components: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. These systems work together to have individual process, store, and retrieve the information based on personal goals and motivation. Although psychologists do not fully agree on strict definition, this model remains highly useful for understanding how sensory input turn into experience and behavior. Now, to understand deeply about these three components, let's compare them together. First, we have the sensory memory. The sensory memory refers to the first stage of memory processing. It stores sensory input for every brief moment. It receives the information from the five senses and is guided by the perceptual alertness and perceptual defense. Second, we have the short-term memory, also known as the working memory. It's temporary storage because it's only stored the memory from second to minute. It supports thinking, learning, and comparison. However, it has the limited capacity and highly attention dependent. And the third, we have the long-term memory. Long-term memory is the permanent storage of information. So it has the unlimited storage capacity. However, it can include the episodic memory, which is the experience, and include the semantic memory, which is the fact or the knowledge of them. And it's also built through the association and repetition. And now let's illustrate how the three memory systems work in the real-life example. I will use the case of Vietnam Airlines, the national carrier of Vietnam. This example shows how sensory cues are processed and stored even when consumers are not consciously evaluating the brand. And when passengers board the aircraft, the sensory memory is activated through the visual cues like the blue gold carpet, the Lotus logo, and the calm tone of announcement, right? And these input lasts only a few seconds but immediately create a sense of safety and familiarity. During the flight, selected impressions move into the short-term memory. The passenger can consciously process the service quality, the seat comfort, and the crew behavior, forming the simple judgment such as the comfort and reliability without a heavy cognitive effort. After the flight, meaningful experiences are stored in the long-term memory because the episodic memory captures a smooth and a respectful journey, while semantic memory stores the belief that Vietnam Airlines is trustworthy and professional. Over time, this stored memory guides a future booking decision automatically, even without the active comparison. Turning to another point, here we have the section 2.4 brain gender. First, we will explore the content about the genetic code. So, brain gender is partly shaped before birth by genetic heritage and hormones. Estrogen and the testosterone regulated by the limbic system, and hypothalamus influence the emotional processing. Dopamine contributes to the differences in motivation, attention, and task performance. As a result, female and male brain may process sensory stimuli differently, especially in emotion, memory, and task execution. From a brain gender perspective, research suggests that female brains tend to process emotional and relational cues more intensively, while male brains often show a stronger response to the goal-oriented and object-focused information. So here we have another example about Phu Nhuận Jewelry. In a BNG sensory environment, female consumer may be more influenced by the emotional symbolism, the visual elegance, and the narrative meaning associated with the jewelry. In contrast, male consumers often focus more on the tangible cues such as the material weight, the price transparency, and the perceived investment value. By offering both emotional and functional sensory cues within the same service environment, BNG effectively addresses difference in how female and male brands process sensory information during the purchase decision. And what about the organizational differences? One fundamental difference between male and female brands lies in their organization rather than intelligence or ability. Although male brands are on average larger in size, this difference is largely proportional to body size and doesn't imply cognitive superiority. A key organizational difference concerns language processing. In male brains, language is mainly located in the left hemisphere, whereas the female brain is involved both hemispheres. And this explains why women often recover language ability more easily after brain injuries and tend to express emotion and experience more fluently. Men, on the other hand, generally perform better in mental rotation and the spatial tasks, such as navigating unfamiliar environment. Women show the stronger performance in emotional language, social communication, and emotional memory. These organizational differences influence how sensory information and the messages and also the environment are perceived and interpreted in everyday consumption contexts. Emotional and sensory differences between female and male brain lead to their different consumption behavior. Emotionally, women tend to be more empathetic and relationship-oriented, while men are generally more systematic and competitive. Women prefer close and direct interaction, including the eye contact and face-to-face communication. This allows them to read the facial expression and the body language more effectively. However, men may feel uncomfortable with the intense eye contact and often prefer more anonymous form of interaction. These emotion differences are reinforced by sensory differences. Women generally have stronger visual memory and are more sensitive to color and sound, and can detect the scents better than men. They are also more sensitive to touch and pain, both physical and emotional. As a result, the same sensory environment or brain stimulus can be interpreted very differently by female and male consumers. According to the sensory brain theory, differences between the female and male brain become especially visible in purchasing and consumption processes. Researchers suggest that men and women process the information and make decisions in different ways. Men tend to show a more goal-oriented decision style, often linking their purchase directly to a specific brand or product. Women, on the other hand, tend to adopt more analytical approach, actively comparing the alternative and seeking more information before making the decision. This figure clearly visualizes these differences. With the same mission is go to Gap, buy a pair of pants, the male shopping path is short and direct. The shopper moved quickly to Gap brand and spend minimal time in the store and complete the task efficiently. In the contrast, the female shopping path is longer and more exploratory, involving multiple retailers such as Macy's, Sears, and JCPenney. This reflects a decision-making process based on the evaluation, comparison, and information processing rather than the speed. Together, the theory and the visual here show that the gender-based brand differences influence not only purchase the outcome, but also shopping time, movement pattern, and the sensitive to the retail environment. Moving to the last part of the chapter 2, what is the neuromarketing? Neuromarketing is a research field that focuses on what happens inside a human brain during product evaluation, purchase, and consumption. Rather than asking consumers what they think or feel, neuromarketing examines the unconcerned emotional and cognitive response triggered by the sensory cues and stimuli. These include how a product looks, how an advertisement is presented, or how a service environment is designed. A key assumption in neuromarketing is that many decisions are not fully conscious. Emotion and social interaction can process strongly influence choice before rational thinking takes place. So what distinguishes neuromarketing from traditional methods like survey or focus group is its ability to directly observe the brain activity. So using the technique, researchers can visualize which part of the brain are activated and respond to specific marketing stimuli. So in this way, neuromarketing provides a deeper insight into how sensory information is processed and how it shapes cognitive, emotion, and behavior beyond what consumers are able to articulate in words. Here we have the table to compare the 3 main neurophysiological techniques used in neuromarketing. First, we have EEG. EEG measures the electrical activity in the brain and is especially useful for capturing how fast consumers react to the stimuli, such as advertisement or visual cues. However, it lacks the spatial precision. Second, we have the MEG. MEG measures the magnetic field generated by the neural activity and offers better localization than EEG, but it is still limited to surface-level brain processes and is less commonly used in marketing research. Finally, we have the fMRI, measure changes in blood flow and provide high-resolution image of brain activity. It allows researchers to identify their emotional and reward-related responses, making it valuable for studying brand perception, pricing, and consumer preferences. Overall, the techniques serve a different purpose, and the fMRI is currently the most widely applied method in neuromarketing due to its ability to link the sensory stimuli with the emotional responses. What are the benefits and drawbacks of neuromarketing? Neuromarketing offers a deeper and more realistic understanding of consumer behavior by examining what happened inside a brand. Unlike survey or the focus group method, it captures the unconcerned feeling and emotional response toward brand and product. It also helps researchers understand how sensory cues are processed in different brand areas, making the brand evaluation and more accurate. As a result, it can better predict how consumers will react to the marketing communication compared to the traditional method. Despite its advantage, neuromarketing has raised ethical concern. The critics fear that companies may use the brand-based insight to unconsciously manipulate the consumer, especially in times of overconsumption and sustainability challenges. They are also concerned related to privacy and the transparency when collecting the neural data. However, many researchers argue that neuromarketing doesn't manipulate consumers but instead improve the understanding of the aesthetic behavior. And that is the end of the sensory marketing presentation about Section 1, Chapter 1 and 2. My name is Nguyễn Võ Tường Vi, and thank you for listening.